Hello everyone, it's me, Gavin, and we're doing another Backlog Bunker this week, which is probably going to be a shorter one than they are usually, because this time I only have to talk about two things, one game and one topic, and they're kind of the same thing anyway, so, let's just get into it. I'm talking about Marvel Midnight Suns. I was supposed to have played Final Fantasy VII this week, but I ended up playing Midnight Suns with most of my free time, and any time that I had planned on playing Final Fantasy VII was time that I didn't get to spend, because I was busy, so it unfortunately ended up that way, and it actually would have gone into the weekly topic anyway, but keeping it on Midnight Suns is more focused, so let's just leave it at that. And there's actually a lot to talk about because, like many games that I played in the earlier episodes of the Backlog Bunker, this is something that I was playing before I started doing these episodes weekly. If anything, I actually haven't played it since I started doing these episodes weekly. So now I just want to talk about, like, a lot of general thoughts about Midnight Suns, and then as we go on, we'll get into the topic that leads into the weekly topic. First of all, one of the biggest glaring flaws with Midnight Suns to me is that the game just does not fucking work. Because a lot of what will happen with Midnight Suns when I launch it normally is that it will crash my entire computer. Not just crash, as a game, the way games typically crash. Not even crashing in the same way that Doom 2016 used to, where it would crash and kind of freeze my computer to the point where I just had to restart it. No, it would actually straight up turn off my entire PC and force it to restart. I don't know how that works. I don't know how this game could be so unoptimized that it breaks the whole fucking thing. And it's not a resource problem, because despite the fact that I hear my PC roll like a fucking jet engine anytime I run the game, I know it's not a resource problem, because A, I turned down all the graphics to the minimum and then the game still has problems, and then B, I've run more graphically intensive games and more resource intensive games than Midnight Suns while doing other things in Chrome, and I've never had a problem with this before. On top of the fact that, depending on how I run the game, it won't crash at all. Because, fun fact, I actually got Midnight Suns for free on the Epic Store, as most people do with their Epic Store library. Because I love XCOM 2, but Firaxis cannot promise me any game that isn't XCOM 3, and then expect me to, pay money for it and stuff. So, I got it for free on Epic, and that must have been a huge fucking mistake, because the 2K launcher is already pretty bad. I don't launch XCOM 2 with it, I use a mod launcher. But again, XCOM 2 never crashed my entire fucking PC, so it must be a combination of 2K and Epic, however that must work. And I had to do a lot of digging and a lot of actual coding work to get Midnight Suns to work, because what I ended up doing was I followed some guy's guide where you turn the launcher for Midnight Suns, the application, but not the 2K launcher, because it automatically goes into that. You do it you turn it into a bat file, and then you just run that, and they'll completely skip all the 2K bullshit, which won't give you online features, but it's a single player game. I don't want online features. Stop putting them in my video games, please. Thank you very much. So I don't really have a problem with that. It's really just, it's a whole fucking process to even get the game to work without killing my entire PC, or rolling like a jet engine, or sometimes just crashing after I finish a mission, because that happens sometimes. I was very afraid it was going to happen while I was recording. Because the whole bat file thing is an imperfect solution. It works to launch the game, and the game from that point will work mostly fine from there. But again, as I stated earlier, Midnight Suns itself is still an unoptimized piece of shit. So depending on what I do in the game, that might just crash it, even if the bat file surpassed the whole 2K launcher problem. But once I dare to get the game to actually work, it's actually pretty fun. Like I said, I like XCOM 2, and it's very much not XCOM 2, but it's different enough that I can appreciate it for what it is, because the problem with XCOM 1 when I tried playing it was that it was too similar to XCOM 2. I was like, oh yeah, this is XCOM, but it ain't XCOM 2, so I'm not going to play it, because I could just play XCOM 2, and every time I play XCOM 1, I'm going to be thinking about XCOM 2, so I should just play XCOM 2. So yeah, the problem with that was too similar, and the problem with Chimera Squad is that it was too different to where none of what I actually liked about XCOM was in the game. None of the different units that have different. Okay, Chimera Squad has different units, but they're all lame different units. They had their own abilities, but they're all distinct characters. That's not really what I want from XCOM. I want classes. I'm not talking about Chimera Squad because I just can't. The point is, Midnight Suns is very different, and it's a good different. In some ways, it's a bit hard to describe because I often struggle with exactly what I find good about a game. It's like that one thing with negativity bias where it's way easier to remember the bad experiences you've had than the good experiences. It's like that, but for critiquing games with me. It's way easier to remember a time I wasn't having fun and I was getting pissed off or annoyed by whatever than a time that I was, content with a game. But even among that, I can still praise games that I like. I can do it for Fire Emblem Awakening all fucking day. But the problem is that I don't really know how to do that for games like Midnight Suns because, on paper, Midnight Suns is a game that I should hate. For one, it's a deck builder, and I do not like deck builders in the slightest. They annoy me so much, because I don't like getting new cards, I don't like rearranging my cards, I don't like having to plan around cards that I may or may not get. If I had to guess, Midnight Suns, sorry, XCOM brain, but Midnight Suns kind of surpasses this by only having 8 card slots, so I don't have to worry about, like, oh, I need to get this card specifically, and if I don't, then I guess the whole fucking mission's a bust, because there's only 8 cards, and a lot of them are going to be doubles anyway, so it's like a 1 out of 4 chance you get the card that you need, and that's, like, pretty good odds. I guess out of the 3 characters you have, it's actually not that good, and I'll get into that for some of the later characters, but it works because there's a very limited number of cards, and the cards you have are all useful for their own things. Again, minus characters that we'll get into later, the cards are all, they're useful enough in the moment that it's not like, oh, I got this card, I'm fucked, or I didn't get this card, I'm fucked. And then there's the overworld shit, which, again, is stuff that I hate because I do not like open world bullshit, and the overworld is so pointless. Like, in XCOM 2, the overworld, so to speak, is really just a waiting game. You put things into practice, and then you wait for the next mission to come up. You have agency in the things that you do while you're waiting, but for the most part, you're just waiting for the next mission to come up. And I don't know why, but I find that addicting in XCOM 2. Like, I love the overworld sections in XCOM 2 just as much as I do the missions. And that's because you're always progressing towards something in the overworld. You're either scanning for resources, or scanning for some other bullshit, or gaining intel, or reestablishing a nation, or not a nation, but you know what I mean, an area, or doing a resource project, or doing the proving ground project, or building a new facility, or upgrading a new facility. It's all playing into the whole gameplay loop, and it just goes round and round in a big old circle, and it's awesome. But in Midnight Suns, the overworld sections are, first of all, you have to walk around them, which is already worse than XCOM. And then it's just you talking to the characters, and sometimes you have to do things like go to the forge to upgrade some new cards and upgrade and open your gamma coils, and then you have to go to the fucking training grounds to train up your guys and buy more or upgrade abilities, and then you go to the fucking hero intel thing so you can do some more hero missions. And it's just a whole lot of walking around for a whole lot of bullshit. In XCOM 2, this would all just be a menu. Well, the menu enough. The ship isn't really a menu, so to speak, but considering they're all in the same place, they might as well be. Point being, it's all just, it takes too long. It's all shit that I don't want to do. It's the No More Heroes problem, where a lot of this could be expedited by just having it be truncated, but it's not, and so it takes time, and so I like it less. And it's not helped by the fact that they are Marvel characters that are in a post-MCU world, so God forbid they ever shut up for 1 goddamn second. They are always talking. I'm sure it happens in my footage at some point, because obviously I upgrade abilities in my footage, and Blade likes to stick around the training ground, but the training ground is also where you upgrade abilities and go on XP grinding missions. And so if you're ever in a menu in that area, Blade doesn't despawn. Nothing despawns. It just takes him to a sub menu. Well, it's a sub menu that also loads up its own models. It's a whole fucking thing. It's a waste of resources. I'm sure that, like I said, this game is incredibly unoptimized. But anyway, the point is, Blade does not stop fucking talking. All he does is talk. Talk in your ear. Everything you do. It's so much. And this applies to more than just the overworld too, because it also applies to the missions, which I know for a fact this is in my missions, or in my footage, because in my footage I do XP grinding missions, which is you just get one of your heroes and you fight a bunch of enemies over and over and over again. And every time they use an ability, they must talk. Every time they move, they must talk. Every time they use an environmental attack, they must talk. Every single time. This is the point where they were very frequently speaking over their own voice lines because by the time I used the next move, they were still getting through their last stupid fucking quip. I love Avengers 2012. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. Not top 10, mind you, but it's very high up there. I think it's the second best MCU movie of all time. However, I can never forgive that movie for what it did to Marvel writing ever, because this applies to more than just the movies. I know that a lot of people complain about MCU dialogue, but it's not just MCU, because Avengers 2012 affected all Marvel properties and then all subsequent properties of things that were inspired by the MCU. But this is included in that. We have classic, very much not Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man and making Iron Man like quips, and it's tiresome, despite the fact that I love a lot of these Marvel heroes, especially Iron Man. Iron Man's my favorite Marvel hero because I watched Iron Man when I was 4 years old, and I keep watching it, and it's the best MCU movie. I'm saying that objectively, not subjectively, by the way. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. But Iron Man is my favorite Marvel hero, probably. Spider-Man's also up there, but I don't know, it's the whole thing. Point being, I love Iron Man. He's awesome. And he's probably one of the best characters in the game, too, so that definitely helps. But my god, stop fucking talking! Everybody's talking! Every time you pass someone in the goddamn Abbey, they have to talk about something. I don't care what you people have to talk about! Stop talking! And I must reiterate, I do like this game. I like playing it, but I don't play it with my headphones on. I'm listening to something else because I just can't do it. And very frequently I wonder if I should just go back to playing XCOM, because even like I was saying with the infinite, or not infinite, but like with the XP grinding missions, you'll just go in with one hero and then fight a bunch of enemies, which you can only do because the way the enemies work is that when you kill them, you get your turn, in a sense, back. So you can just, you know, go on them for as long as you can keep killing them. And they're just the Lost from XCOM 2. Specifically, War of the Chosen, but mind you, whenever I say the words XCOM 2, I mean War of the Chosen, because that's the real XCOM 2. XCOM 2 proper is just XCOM 1.5. When I say XCOM 2, I mean War of the Chosen, because that's like the real game. But the point is, they just made the Lost again, because the way the Lost work in XCOM 2 is that whenever you get a headshot on them, which is just a random roll, that unit gets their turn back. And that's just what the same thing is in Midnight Suns. And I'm not complaining, because I like the Lost in XCOM 2. I just feel like Firaxis might not have all that much confidence in things that aren't XCOM, because they just ended up making XCOM again. Not entirely, mind you, like I said, it's a very different game. But still, if they like XCOM so much, then why don't they just make XCOM 3? That's a real-ass question, by the way. I want XCOM 3. Stop making stupid Civ games that no one plays. I'm sure no one plays them. They are very unpopular. I mean, I don't play them, so that must mean no one does, right? This is a veiled Darkside Phil reference that no one but, like, a few people are gonna get. Why would I even bother? But, you know, on the serious side, I do just want XCOM 3, and this is more of a stopgap than anything, because once I'm done with Midnight Suns, I'm probably never gonna play it again. If I'm having trouble describing the good parts of the game, because, mind you, we've been here for like 10 minutes, and I've only ever talked about the bad parts of the game, because I couldn't even really describe the parts that I like about it all that much, then, like, what am I really gonna get out of ever playing this game again? And I think that means we should just talk about the rest of the things I have to talk about, because, my god, I think the movement system is fucking awful. So, to once again bring up XCOM 2, the way movement works in that game is that you have two actions. Every unit has two actions, a movement action and an attacking action, or just like an action. I don't know how to describe it. Point is, there's moving and then there's everything else. And the way the game works is that you can move and then attack, or whatever other action, or if you just take the action, depending on what it is, your turn might just end there, but it's typically, if it's anything except for shooting or throwing a grenade, you can do that and then move. But the point is that movement is always one of your two actions per unit. But in Midnight Suns, the way it works is that you only get one move across your entire team for an entire turn, which means that if you need to move a unit, that better be the only unit you plan on moving, because otherwise, the other two are going to be moved dictated based on their abilities. Because the way that actually having your characters move works is that whenever you use an ability, it will automatically place them in a spot after they're done using that ability that seems to be completely arbitrary. Like, aside from a few standout examples like Spider-Man's quick kick, which will just put him like right in front of wherever the enemy used to be standing, and I'm not even sure about that. I'm like, going off of what I remember, I'm pretty sure that's how it works, but there might be cases where that isn't the case, so don't quote me on that. But yeah, outside of a few fringe cases where you either don't move or you always get put in the same spot, a lot of abilities will just put you in a random spot after they're done, and this can end up in some very disadvantageous positions, because there are things like Captain Marvel's photon beam, and the way that works is that it just shoots out an attack in a line. But if you don't have any more movement, and Captain Marvel has been placed in a awful spot due to whatever other ability you might have used, then you can't really make very good use of that ability at all. Or, conversely, if you need to use Captain Marvel's photon beam, you have to dedicate your movement to her, which means that you can't use a push action with any other hero, or reposition anyone else if they need to do something. Like, for example, get them out of the way of an AoE attack, or use an environmental attack in a specific way. Because environmental attacks will come in like two varieties. There's one where it's just a thing you can activate and it will like damage a certain area, which is fine, because the heroes will just use long range attacks for that for those to go off. But then there's things like tables you kick over, or like tables you have to vault over to attack someone on the other side. But if you can't move, you can only attack, you know, on the opposite side of wherever you're trying to attack. And if you don't have any movement, and the person you're trying to attack is not on the very opposite side of you, you just can't do anything with them. Then there's the fucking poles, which are the opposite way, where they have to be in the same range of direction as you're coming from. It's a whole fucking thing, and it just does not work most of the time. Which isn't to mention the fact that environmental attacks are already pretty expensive and costly, because that's the same thing. Because they cause heroism, and they require a lot of setup to use, which granted, they are very powerful. They do some pretty decent damage, but there's so few of them, and they're so hard to actually fucking use, depending on where the enemies randomly end up, that it's just not really worth it a lot of the time. And then there's the controls for movement, which are awful, because sound the XCOM 2 alarm, because the way movement controls work in that game is that you move to wherever you point at, and then you right-click. And if you need to go farther than one movement action will take you, because you can also just spend both actions on moving farther, you just move farther than your movement range, and it will take up both actions, and the game will clearly define this to you by outlining which parts of the grid are in blue and which parts are in yellow, to denote like which ones are close and which ones are far. But in Midnight Suns, there are sub-states of movement that can only be controlled by a linear menu of movement. So let's put it like this. In XCOM 2, if you do a blue movement, you can still do a yellow movement, just move again. Or if you want to do a movement and then an action, then just do an action. It's a branching menu type of thing, or a branching choice, whatever you want to call it. But in Midnight Suns, as soon as you've committed to a movement action, it's a linear menu, which can prime you for some awful misclicks. Because, God forbid, you want to move to somewhere that's a little bit too close to an enemy, which will bring you into the next menu of, okay, now where do you want to push this enemy? And it's like, well, no, I don't want to push them, I just want to walk. Which means you have to back out into the menu, and then, go to wherever you're looking. And then you have to finagle with the stupid-ass controls of controlling the camera, which don't always work the same way, if at all sometimes, because you use WASD to move the camera around, and then right-click to actually, like, rotate it. In a sense, it's hard to describe, you'll see it in the footage, but those don't always work, because sometimes you have an ability highlighted that's also a linear menu that will sometimes turn off your camera controls, but not all the time, because right-clicking is how you rotate the camera. Right-clicking is also how you deactivate an ability. What if I need to activate the ability, and then look for when I want to activate it? If they're gonna copy the loss from XCOM 2, then why couldn't they copy the movement system? The way it works in Midnight Suns is so arbitrary and annoying to finagle with that I hate it with all of my heart, to the point where I am once again wondering why I even like playing this game. Which I guess kind of brings us to the characters, because I don't want to go over like every single one, not that I think I have them all unlocked anyway. Well, I mean, I might, because Scarlet Witch is in the game, and I still haven't gotten her. But I got Wolverine, I'm pretty sure he's one of the last. The point is, I want to talk about the characters, but not all of them. So, there are characters in the game that I think are some of the best in the game, like Iron Man and Captain Marvel. Iron Man because he can do a lot of damage very quickly and very efficiently without any cost. Because Iron Man's whole gimmick is that you can redraw cards in the game to, get whatever other ability you might want. And when you redraw an Iron Man card, it won't replace it with a different card. It'll just redo that card but stronger. And so you can do a lot of things with Iron Man that are just like an infinite loop of getting cards back, or getting card plays back at least. And he can also do a lot of damage very quickly across multiple enemies, because his multi-targeting skills are not limited by range, which is something a lot of other characters can't say. And so you can do things like Surgical Strike, I think it is, where it's for every Iron Man card that you have in your hand, you just get like a 50 to 60 damage attack, and which doesn't sound like a lot, but Midnight Suns works on very low numbers. So a 50 damage attack can like kill most enemies, and 2 of those will kill most stronger enemies. And so, if you can get 4 or 5 of those, you can absolutely fucking clear waves of enemies, and that's one card, assuming you don't use any of your other Iron Man cards first, which again, will refund you card plays, so God forbid you ever have 5 Iron Man cards in your hand, which gives you like 250 damage across whatever enemies you want to target, and then on top of that, if those cards were things like his quickfires, or whatever they are, that do forceful knockback, you can just pick off the enemies that are left with card refunds that will just allow you to use every other card in your hand. I won't say Iron Man's the best character in the game, because I haven't exactly gone over every single one to say that for sure, but he's definitely top 3. Another one up there is Captain Marvel, because she's just very strong, as Captain Marvel tends to be, because her attacks do a lot of damage. She can go binary, which will make her attacks do even more damage, and she can just infinitely farm block to have block upwards in like the 250s, which is more health than most characters or enemies have. Really the only downside to her is that she costs a lot of heroism to use, which is a resource in the game that you get from using weaker abilities to use your stronger abilities. And so when you have Captain Marvel's abilities costing like 2 or 3 heroism per for a lot of the best ones, while a lot of the weaker ones are kind of shit before she goes binary, then you're going to spend a lot of the game building up Captain Marvel. But then once she's in go mode, she's in go mode, which I guess kind of applies to a lot of the characters in the game, because the way Iron Man works is that you only get 2 redraws in a turn normally, but he has a lot of passive abilities that will give you more redraws, so you can have up to like 5 per turn. And obviously that plays into the whole redrawing cards things I was talking about earlier. And then Captain Marvel has going binary, which is just a super state she's in as long as she has block. And again, you can keep farming block with some of her abilities. So when she's in that go mode, she just can't really be stopped. Doctor Strange has a go mode where his abilities will become enhanced when he has certain levels of heroism, even though he can still use the abilities without the heroism. So you can just build up a shit ton of heroism with his cards that will like increase the damage of all the cards in his fucking hand, or give him more card plays and increase all his damage and give him more cards, which again will give him heroism out the fucking ass. And then with all the cards he just farmed and all the damage he just farmed and all the heroism he just farmed, he just fucking annihilates every single enemy in the game. And that really describes what Midnight Suns' gameplay loop is that the characters have go modes, and once they're in those go modes, that's like when the fun part of the game starts. Which I get, okay, we finally found out what the fun part of the game was. I think I like having the characters in their go modes, because also I like strategy. I like strategy games. That's the crux of it, I guess. The vague one would be, I like strategy games, and to be more specific, I like having the strategy to go into their go modes. This doesn't apply to every character, because characters like Spider-Man are a little bit harder to work with, since a lot of his go modes are worked around having enemies that are already weakened. So on a solo team, he's not like really all that strong, but on a team with a bunch of other people that can weaken a bunch of enemies for him first, he can actually just finish them all off in quick succession. Or Captain America, who doesn't necessarily have a go mode where he just starts killing everything on the fucking screen, but he has a go mode where he just has all the block and counter in the world, or not counter, block and taunt in the world, so he just tanks the entire fucking mission, and then everyone else picks off damage for him, while he also does damage because he's decently good at that. And so my methodology for how good some of the characters are is kind of revolved around how good their go mode is, if they have one at all, and how easy it is to access. Because characters like Magic have a gameplay loop where it's like, oh yeah, you want to set up a lot of portals and do a lot of launching attacks, but those don't really do a whole lot of damage from Magic because she's just not all that great of a character. And so her go mode is mostly revolved around hoping you get more limbo portals to use, and if you don't get those, then whoops. Like, I'm not going to call myself absolutely fantastic at Midnight Suns, but I think I really worked a goddamn miracle doing her grinding EXP mission without taking any damage, because Magic is a very interesting character to have to work around when she doesn't have any support abilities, or support heroes, but it worked because those enemies were ones that she could farm more cards off of, as well as getting all of her card plays back. In normal missions, Magic is way hard to use because you don't get any of your card plays back. So if your card plays for Magic consist of set up a portal and then launch one enemy that did like not even half their health, that did like a fourth of their health, and then didn't kill them, it's way weaker. And again, that's assuming you even get those cards, because Magic will then have to contend with getting other cards for other heroes. So like I said, she's not a horrible character, but she has no go mode, and she's worse when in the presence of other characters. So it's kind of hard to work with her. But she is not the worst character in the game. Like I said, I know who the worst character in the game is. Even though I don't have everyone yet, I can guarantee you that this character will always be the worst one in the game, and that's Nico Minoru, who I almost want to call an industry plant character, because she's part of the Inhumans, which was already a plant by Marvel to get people to forget about the X-Men. And then, on top of that, she's getting put into new things like that Spider-Man animated show that's coming out, and I don't think most people know what the fuck a Nico Minoru is. So, I feel like she's being a little bit forced, but I don't really care, because I actually kind of like her design, and her abilities, at least lore-wise, are interesting. The problem with her is that she fucking sucks in Midnight Suns, because Nico's whole thing is random abilities. No, not the cards that she gets are random, that's how the whole game works. I mean, like, the actual things the cards do are random. Like, Nico's strongest ability, or at least one of, is Witchfire, which will target a random enemy on the field, and if it kills them, it'll target one other enemy and then also hit them. But I think you might have already noticed what the problem with this ability is, which is that it's fucking random who you target. And so if it's random who you target, you can't guarantee you're gonna kill anyone with the fucking first fire. And you can't even guarantee good damage with the rest of Nico's abilities, because the rest of them are support abilities, and they're not even that good at that. So when you put Nico in the EXP grinding room, where the entire point is that you have to continuously kill enemies, it kind of fucking sucks when you use Witchfire twice and both of them target enemies that cannot be killed by Witchfire. I did the grinding room with a few characters at this point. I did it with Magic, did it with Doctor Strange, did it with Captain Marvel, did it with Spider-Man, pretty sure I did it with the Hunter, and Nico's was the only one that I failed. Nico's was the only one I even had trouble with, aside from, I guess if you want to count Magic, but that was just me thinking. I didn't actually get hit. But in Nico's, I absolutely ate shit because Nico can't fucking do anything. Her abilities are so dependent on either other heroes to weaken enemies or her own cards to fucking work that trying to do anything with her is like pulling teeth. Having her and Magic on a team is basically a death sentence, which I say because the game makes you do that earlier on. And I think that was the first mission I ever got a 1-star rating on, because it's fucking impossible to work with these two characters. Magic is already an uphill battle, and then she's working on a team with fucking Nico Minoru, who can't do anything by herself. And then even when she's supporting, she's basically useless. Next to useless, at least. A good barometer for telling how good or bad a character is, in any strategy game really, is how reliable is that character. Can you guarantee that a thing will happen with that character at least most of the time, if not all the time? Rabbid Rosalina is a very, very good character in Mario Rabbids 2, because you can guarantee that she will crit at least half of her hits and do some insane damage to whoever she shoots, as well as the fact that you can guarantee enemies get put to sleep. Long Q is a very reliable character in Fire Emblem Awakening because he's a Meridian, which means that he already has high crit chance, on top of the fact that he can equip Killing Edges, which have even higher crit chance, so you can basically just form your entire Long Q gameplay around just having him crit all the time. But when playing Nico is a fucking gamble on whether or not you'll even be able to do any fucking damage, then she's just a character that's a waste of fucking space on any mission she gets put on, and then God forbid she gets put on her own. Because if there are any strategy fans in the audience, or Marvel Midnight Suns fans in the audience, I want you to tell me, if you can, if there was anything I could have possibly done to have not failed the Nico mission. Because genuinely with the position I was put in, what could I have done but what happened? And how could anything but me losing have happened? I was put in a terrible position, with terrible odds, with a terrible character. Which brings us very neatly into this week's topic, which is about variance, specifically TheoTTree's video about variance in Darkest Dungeons. And to get this out of the way, I do agree with Theo's overall point that a lot of people can downplay their actual agency in the events that led them up to whatever bad RNG roll fucked over their whole thing. Because yeah, you can just make bad decisions that will lead you to a worse outcome if you happen to get a bad roll. However, I feel like he didn't properly take into account the times where there really isn't anything he could have done, and that sometimes even the decisions you make before the bad roll could have been the best decisions you make in that moment, and they still lead you to the bad outcome. Let's take XCOM for example, because XCOM on Legend difficulty is borderline impossible, because the way the game works is that it will just decrease all of your chances for anything working ever, and a lot of the ways you might have to play around this is choosing between high cover and low cover. Because typically in XCOM 2, you don't really have to make that strong of a decision against high cover or low cover, because high cover will increase your defense but lower your offense, while low cover will increase your offense but lower your defense. But you still don't really have to choose between them all that often, because on lower difficulties, your chances for either having a good enough defense or a good enough offense will just work fine enough for you. But on Legend difficulty, when having low defense might just mean the death of a character, or having low offense might mean that an enemy that you need to have killed now does not die, then, you know, having to choose between those two is a very important decision. However, again, on Legend difficulty, your chances of everything happening will be lowered. So even if you choose high cover, just to give you that little bit of extra defense to hopefully not get hit by whatever enemy shot, you're still massively lowering your chances to actually hit your shot against them, and all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable. Because any shot you miss at XCOM is another chance for the enemy to live whatever turn you're on, and if they live whatever turn they're on, that's another chance for them to kill one of your units. And remember, you only get 4 of those, while the enemy will get at least 6, and that's in the easier missions. So having to choose between never being able to hit your shots and just prolonging the inevitable death of your own team, or being able to hit your shots but then having lower defense and then just having the inevitable death of your team come faster, is a kind of no-win scenario on Legend difficulty. And then, God forbid, even if you survive the initial encounter with even one of your guys, you're still going into the next mission with only 1 upgraded unit, if even. Which means that your next team will have to go up against odds that are just as bad with stronger enemies. Which, to get to the ultimate point that I'm trying to make, is that Theo's conclusion is, oh, the actions you take up to the bad roll could have made the bad roll be less impactful for you. But that doesn't really take into account that the actions you took up to the bad roll could have also been bad rolls, or even just a complete reversal. If you had a bad roll first, and then you made only the best decisions afterwards, but you still couldn't compensate for the bad roll that happened earlier to you. This whole scenario I've described with XCOM on Legend difficulty is a case of an early bad roll fucking over even perfect decisions later on, because no matter how perfect your decisions are later, if you go into a mission with only terrible units, you're not going to be able to make any headway. And that's for more action-focused games. That doesn't even take into account things like, block followers like Honey Pop or Tetris, where you can't know ahead of time everything that's ever going to fall beneath you, or at least on top of you. So you can't always make the perfect decisions, because sometimes what might be the perfect decision in the moment can still just get you fucked over. I've had many situations in Honey Pop where I made a good decision in the moment, but then a block falls that I could not have known was going to fall, and it completely ruins the entire section. This is a bad roll that I could not have accounted for and could not have recovered from. I know I mentioned Tetris, but Tetris actually kind of avoids this problem by having far less variance in what you actually get, to the point where a lot of the blocks you actually choose to put in certain places are going to be entirely your own. There's only but like 5 possible blocks to get, and outside of very rare scenarios where you just won't get a certain block for a long time, which again are rare, you can play around basically anything you're given in Tetris. I say all this to say that for every situation where it absolutely is someone downplaying their own agency and not really talking about what they did wrong to lead up to the bad roll, there are just as many situations where a bad roll is just a bad roll, and it was not fun to get that bad roll, because what was I supposed to do about it? And this isn't a condemnation of like all RNG in games or whatever, because like, I like XCOM, and I like Midnight Suns enough, and I love RPGs, so evidently I don't have that big of a problem with variance. But I think it is poor design for any game that allows for poor variance to just completely screw over the entire game's design. Because XCOM on the lower difficulties has like the perfect amount of variance. Because on XCOM normally, you're probably going to have a few characters die, but it's not going to be your entire squad, assuming you play the game correctly. And you'll have more than enough time to build up an entire army of very strong units that you can use to replace anyone that might die. But if going from Commander to Legend is you die in the first mission or you end the game with like the most broken characters in existence, then I would call Legend a poorly designed difficulty with poorly designed variance. I'm sure this will be a topic that comes up again one day, because as I mentioned earlier, I was going to play Final Fantasy VII this week, and yeah, it absolutely would have come up in that game because it's an RPG. Of course it would come up. But since I only played Midnight Suns this week, and Midnight Suns is basically XCOM adjacent, I figured this would just be a nice topic for this week as a whole. And look, it got us like 30 minutes without having to talk about any other game. Well, okay, I did talk about XCOM 2 a lot, and a few other games. But for the most part, this was mostly about Midnight Suns, and it got me at 30 minutes. So, who's the real winner here? Because it's not me. I have to edit all 30 minutes of this, which is kind of defeating the point of the whole reason I made this series, but I digress. Get out of here. We're done. That's it.